about technology and addiction, and our last presenter of the day is Jamison Wiggins.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as people trickle in, I may ask them to also do this. But as I walked in, I noticed a lot of us have these. They're either out. Hi, come on in. Doing a bit of an experiential thing. So before we get started,
You're
I'd
not going
like
to ask us to
offer
turn
you-
them off.
I'm going to ask you to join me in a little experiment. It'll get us all on the same page. If you've got, who's got one of these?
Cut it
Did you
off.
take it out? Something like this. We call them smartphones. I doubt they
I
are.
have a dumb phone.
They make me dumber. Okay?
Yeah, that's
and
true.
If you put it on airplane mode, you don't have to turn it all the way off. And then, if you're willing, and if you're not willing to do this, that's okay. Just notice what comes up for you. Find somebody sitting next to you and give it to them for the duration. Surrender it to them for the duration of the talk. So like,
Turning it off.
turning it off is
He
fine.
doesn't want to.
I don't want it.
You don't have to. Would you hold yours? Can I hold yours?
Sure.
No. What is
We're surrendering our phones.
So or just turn it off. Whatever works.
That's what he's saying. So if you're feeling challenged,
You're gonna have to be really entertaining for 20 minutes then, right?
No. Okay. So everybody figured out you can turn it off, airplane mode or whatever it is, but
Okay.
the challenge is to surrender your device. Or just, it's okay. You don't have. If you don't want to do it, that's totally fine. Just notice what's coming up for you around even the challenge of surrendering that device.
thinking about reading her text.
And if you're watching
love
this on the
giving it
video, you don't have anybody give you your phone, so you can just turn off the video and stop using technology right now. And if you're an addict, welcome. Keep watching because you need the technology.
Hi.
So now that I have your uninterrupted attention, my name is Jamison Wiggins, and I am powerless over technology. It's something that drives me and runs me. It's how I came to this work. I noticed for myself that I went from using it, or what I thought was using it as a powerful tool to do my academic work, to communicate and relate to people, to abusing it. And using it, or abusing it to fix my experience of life. To numb the pain, and to make the suffering go away. And this is what I used to do it, was technology itself. Now, I'm not a neo-Luddite. I'm standing here and I have this computer here and I didn't print anything out, and it is still a powerful tool, but there is a way in which bringing consciousness to it and mindfully choosing not to use technology, or use as little as possible, I find truly serves me. And I'm not a neo-Luddite. I don't believe in no technology, because we're like alcoholics and the whole world's a bar. It's expected of us. Or food addicts who are stuck at a buffet, right? We can't not be part of a technological system. There's an eco-psychologist, Chalice Glendinning, who basically related the way in which she compared today's public awareness of the impacts of technology to people's views of alcohol in the 1950s. It was more than socially acceptable to drink. It was more than just acceptable, it was required. You would be at the workplace, and if you didn't do it, you weren't a part of. The steel mill workers in the 50s would literally, at the 11 o'clock in the morning, would take a shop break. This was normal, right? Just as we sit now with friends, and we're having dinner, and in certain circumstances, maybe it's okay to just respond to that text message. Maybe it's okay to check the news while you're spending time with people. So I approach this as, in what I've noticed in myself, and I look at it, my work is largely with the individual presently, and is moving on to looking at society, but largely that our society is part of this kind of drunk Promethean dream of a man-made millennium. And that's part of what drove me. And that's part of what I see drives quite a bit of the business here in the city. And I don't deride them for that at all, because this is something very basic. And my intention and my work is to largely look at the relationship to technology and begin to ask and answer the question of how we learn to use technology soberly. How we learn to live in a technological society soberly. So to do that today, I'm going to tell you a bit about how I'm defining tech addiction, and then I'm going to go on to the different types and the categories in which I place them, and then some of the different recovery modalities that are emergent, and it's still very nascent. So, to start, I'm not talking about all technology. I'm pretty dependent on my car and public transport and all those technologies, but here I'm talking about information and communication technology. Right? The phone in your pocket, the computer, the way in which we relate. I've taken, as a way to find the definition, I've taken Gabor Mate's, the Canadian psychiatrist who's done a lot of work on addiction, and I adapted his definition for addiction specifically for technology. And it has 4 parts, all of which need to be met to really identify as addicts. And this is important because there is problem use with technology, and then there's addiction, full addiction. So first is a compulsive engagement with the technology, or a preoccupation with it. Has anybody thought about their phone since I started talking? Yeah, there's one.
Cool.
Okay, it's like, who has my phone? Is anybody
I
responding
just
to
looked
that
at it,
text
oh
message?
shit, it's not mine.
Right, okay. Yeah, try not to respond to any text messages. Okay. Or impaired control over their behavior with technology. You ever find yourself checking your phone? Or just, you were writing the paper and you just found yourself on Facebook?
Texting and driving.
Texting and driving, right. And persistent or relapse despite evidence of harm. There's a lot of evidence out there that shows that texting is just about as bad as drinking and driving. And yet, I can do it. And it's like, oh, okay, that message is coming in. And even though I relapse into this despite evidence of harm. And lastly, a dissatisfaction, irritability, or intense craving when disconnected from technology or when technology is not immediately available. So you ever have that fear of missing out?
FOMO.
Maybe FOMO. There's even an acronym for it in technological lexicon, which says, if I don't have this connection, this digital connection, I may miss out on something that's happening. There's a deep fear. In this case, there's actually a new phobia that they've defined, which is called nomophobia.
Oh, really?
Fear of being without your cell phone. Anybody ever gone home, left their phone at home on the way to work, and then you go back and get it? Yeah, got a couple of heads nodding. So, for the sake of research and working into this, began looking into 4 types of technology addiction. The first is videophilia, which is just by itself a love, meaning love of the screen. Right? So rather than biophilia and this love of nature, we move towards just this love of the screen. I like this little glowy thing in my face. I really do. I also include in that streaming media is a big part of that. And that includes Netflix likes to call them Netflix marathons, right? Where they release an entire season of a show. And they say, here, enjoy a marathon over the weekend. It's going to be a wonderful restorative weekend activity for you. And they couch it this way. And first of all, a marathon requires training, right? I don't need to do any training to watch Netflix. A marathon is a race. I'm competing, right? I don't achieve anything for finishing the race at all. So I call it what I think it is. Watching an entire season in one sitting or in one day is a binge. I've gone out and I've started drinking on this episode, and it's like, ooh, what happens in the next one? Ooh, what happens in the next one? And even that point where Netflix now has you no longer have to hit next. It just waits 15 seconds and then goes into the next one. There's no pause. And in the depths of addiction, you'll find addicts can't even wait 15 seconds. They go, ooh, just keep it coming. So that's videophilia. The next is social networks, and the way in which we do feel compelled to connect through them. And the way in which, rather than you harnessing them as ways to actually relate to each other in the real world, we use them as ways to feel connected, even if superficially. The third is video games. These are the hard drugs of technology addiction. This is where people are dying now. There have been a lot of reports coming out of Asia, especially Korea, where they've started to do a lot of this research, but there are people dying here now from video game addiction, and largely from neglecting self-care to the point where, they literally have physical failure. Some bodily system fails because they cannot remove themselves from video games. And this is where the distinction I make, and I found in my work, is the difference between playing a game and having a game play you. Mm-hmm. Right? I play a game, and that's recreation. Right? When a game plays me, it's training me. It asks me to go through a maze so that I get to the other side. I'm the mouse in the maze. And I go after it that way. And that way it trains me to do something, which is a very nice reprieve. It's a nice break. But in an addiction, is no longer something that actually is just a break. It's something that is fundamentally destructive to the way we think. And the last category is our smartphones, which I asked you to surrender. We have become incredibly dependent upon these. They're ubiquitous portals, and it is really, that device alone is what really changes it. Because I can close this and walk away, but this phone has become so transparent, and what's coming now, the way in which technology has become so transparent, it is that much more difficult to be mindful and use the technology consciously. So, what do we do? What are the consequences of technology addiction? How do we come to know this? Because the conversation is still a new one. And we aren't, unlike alcoholics, unlike addicts, right, that are addicted to hard drugs or any drugs for that matter, unlike them, we might crash a car by text messaging, we might recognize it that way. But for most of us, you're doing the Netflix binge by yourself at home over the weekend. And the consequences of it may be not being able to relate. Maybe an increase, there have been a lot of studies coming out, increase in attention, the shortening of attention span, an increase in ADHD, increase in obesity, relationship problems, and the list goes on and on. The statistics I find interesting, but not compelling at all, but I'll offer you some. So the Stanford study all the way back in 2006 said that, found that 1 in 8 individuals show signs of problematic use of technology. 1 in 8. 12.4% stay online longer than they intended. So they're going to say, I'm going to stop here. 12%. Keep going. 13.7% of US residents find it difficult to stay away from the internet for a few days. That kind of dependency. How we can't do without it now. So I could go on and on with the statistics, and it's a really interesting part of the conversation. You can compare it against other kinds of addictions and what's there, but it doesn't matter. Because addicts self-identify. They have to know their own experience. You can't, if I could, hey, you're a tech addict, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we actually have a felt experience of the consequence, which is why I asked you to surrender your phone. Right? So you get to sit with that here. Now, maybe I should have been a bit more boring, so you would really be compelled, right? Hopefully I'm engaging enough. I still have everybody's eye contact, so that's going. So the way I found this my bottom here was through that video feeling, through that binging on video. And I thought it was a secondary issue. I thought that watching a lot of Netflix was a way to kind of get through the hard times. I was going through a dark night, and I thought it was depression, and there's just anxiety, and the semester was getting busy, and it was difficult. So I'll watch some video, and it'll be fine. And then I thought, maybe I'll just start tracking, and I used some technological tools to just track what I actually did online. And at the end of the first week, it said, Jamison, you have been on your computer over 70 hours this week. 54 hours of that, you've been watching video in a week. That's more than a full-time job. And that's where I came and said, okay, this is no longer a secondary thing. This is a primary way I'm using to attempt to fix my feeling, this internal thing that's happening, this anxiety and this fear. I'm now using technology directly to do that. So I took it out of that, and I started to say, okay, how can I work with this? And I went into a personal intervention. And at first I tried doing it on my own. And I tried just cutting it off. Say, okay, I just won't do that anymore. I'll use my willpower and just go and do that. And this is largely what distinguishes addicts from non-addicts, is that didn't work for me. I went and said, oh, I'm not going to do that, but that misalignment, that fear was still present. And so ultimately I said, oh, I want to use that thing again to make myself feel better. And my work with other addicts is bearing this out as well. And what I ask of them, which is part of what I've asked of myself, is to attempt to take a fast. Right? Whether it's a 24-hour fast and there's a lot of tech Sabbaths is often a thing, is something that's coming more and more, or at least set a certain kind of abstinence so you can experience what it's like to try and set this boundary. Like alcoholics trying to do controlled drinking. Give it a shot and see if it's something that works for you. Which really transitions to, okay, now we're at recovery. Right? So if you've identified that there's a technology addiction within you, then we start looking towards solutions and what we can do with that. Because it comes back to this, if we're alcoholics and the whole world is a bar, if we're tech addicts and we're asked no, the world demands that we use technology. How do we live in this? I mean, I can go live out on a camp somewhere, but then I don't get to participate in this thing, and even that's a massive privilege. So how do we live here with this? And honestly, there's no empirical research done so far on what recovery modalities work for technology addiction. They're not out there. But to generalize, there are fundamentally two categories. They're the self-will and discipline, or the first one is self-will and discipline. And people who take these tech Sabbaths, and they choose to abstain. And every 20 minutes they'll stop and they'll look up and they'll adjust their vision. Or every half hour they'll sit and do a little meditation to take a break from the computer. They have their own abstinence plan and what they determine to be healthy use for them. And they follow it. These are the people that, and it's wonderful, this is not me, and this is not addicts. An addict fundamentally can't do that. The self-will and the discipline is not enough. And it's tough. It's as hard as being an alcoholic because it's right in your pocket now. So the other side of it, and another way to understand that is when self-sufficiency fails us, and when our tech shadow is just too dark. Right? There's too much there, and we have to look beyond. So the other side of this is the psycho-spiritual solutions. And I've started research and looking into adapting different psycho-spiritual models, especially 12-step traditions, because they do an excellent job of community building, and then also specific steps you can work to. Because fundamentally at the bottom of any addiction, and I believe this is specifically or explicitly an addiction, at the bottom of this is a spiritual misalignment. I can do everything I want. I've set locks on the computer, I've given people passwords to say don't let me on this thing, right? But this is the antidote. This is the way in which medicine just treats the symptom. This is the same thing. There's a fundamental misalignment. And here lies the opportunity as well. So within the psycho-spiritual solution, we have this opportunity for community. Because we now have this thing, we have another thing to organize around. If you share some of this technology addiction, if you allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to share that, we can come together as community. Because fundamentally, me as an addict and what I witness in other people is that there's this relief. There's the relief of the tech fast and being away for it for a moment. But there's no freedom without this spiritual underpinning. I began working with people and helping them first admit powerlessness so that they can really experience that for themselves. So that they can go through this abstinence and say, look, I couldn't do that. I truly am powerless over this technology. Then they go through an inventory process, which is writing out exactly what they do and how they use it. And in that, they're able to see exactly how it's manifesting for them. And then, because it's a spiritual solution, it's looking to what their own spiritual experience is of it, so that they can access resources greater than themselves. And that comes through in community. So, a couple more minutes. And this is where the emergence really starts. Life in general is an adventure in uncertainty. And what technology, part of the reason I believe we developed technology was to remove some of that uncertainty so that we could try and solve parts of life. And that for me is not what's enlivening. I could have left this screen up here, recorded a video, and then had Ishtar press play. But why did we all show up? You all could have watched it at home. There's something else about me being here and putting it up there. I'm schwitzing a little bit, and my mouth is getting a little dry, I'm a little nervous. It's a lot more awkward talking in front of people you know than in front of strangers. And there's this uncertainty, and there's this risk. There's this enlivening that goes on with actually doing it in real life. And that is very much so what I consider, well, that's the point. The point is being able to show up to life. And the thing is I now have this tool that allows me to not have to do that.
Yeah.
So I need help. I need you to witness me, and I need to be here. I need someone to hold my phone as I hold their phone. As you hold my technology, I hold your technology. As you hold my shadow, I hold your shadow. And that's the organizing. So, back to Prometheus. It is that our Promethean fire, this technology, again, it keeps us warm. It literally runs our home, right? It's how we relate to each other as part of what's doing it. But it doesn't keep our spirit warm. It doesn't enliven. It doesn't keep that soul going. It is a powerful way to connect. And it's not enough. And it doesn't actually connect us at depth. And as we walk through the shadow of technology, we have this opportunity, again, to make light. For me, I was at CIS, and I'm in this, I realized I watched 54 hours of video, and I started mentioning it to people. I go, I just watched 54 hours of Netflix. And people had one of two reactions. They said, whoa, right? That's okay. Or, me too. And this is what I'm finding more and more. No matter what it is my ability, or any individual's ability to just be vulnerable enough to what's really here. Because this is a hidden addiction, and it's becoming more and more. There are 2-year-olds with iPad pacifiers that have no idea what's coming at all. But our ability to be vulnerable and share a bit of that is where this starts. Because ultimately, these are super tools. They're amazing. All these phones and the things we can do with them, the capacity to connect and just be with each other, harnessing them and using them. But left unchecked, they end up using us and we end up abusing them. So ultimately, these super tools give us superpowers so that we get to be superheroes in helping each other recover. Thank you.
Vodka?
So I think super awesome talk. I think it's also really interesting that you brought up Gabor Mate.
Yes.
Because Gabor Mate works with addiction,
Yes.
but his solution was exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
He uses plant technology.
Yep.
And it's still called technology.
Yeah.
So it's also interesting, there's Susan Blackmore talks about teams, which are technological memes. And I came up with the idea of plemes, which would be plant consciousness memes. And it seems like these two are kind of helping each other, if you will. Like one way to get out of that addiction is to work with plant technology. And this brings you back to spirit, and this brings you back to an embodied sense, and this brings you back to sort of the environment. So,
Very much so.
I think it was interesting that Gabor Mate made it in because of all his work he's doing with other types of technology. So I guess the question would be, how do we differentiate between, for example, they're both called technologies,
Yes.
but one seems, I guess they can both be abused, but how do you sort of differentiate the different technologies out there?
For my work, I stick to information and communication technology.
Sure.
It fundamentally, because a pencil, the first hammer was a technology. And we are dependent on many of them, and that's the distinction, is the difference between dependence and otherwise. Much like as with entheogens, in the way in which for some people, certain ones can be addictive in certain circumstances, or not, certain people get addicted to them, and not in other circumstances. So I make the distinction there just to keep it contained. The other side of it is the way in which information and communication technology is actually part of the solution. So I work with people around the world through it, and it enables that. So it's really about the way in which I soberly use it, and the way in which I connect to other people to do it. It is that super tool. And yeah, that's that.
Yeah, thank you.
First, I just want to offer a comment how much more connected I feel to you because you did not use PowerPoint. And that's interesting. Just I appreciate images and I learn a lot from images, but all day I've been looking at PowerPoint. Yours is the first I think that I've seen today that has not had a PowerPoint. I really feel connected to you personally, and I paid more attention to you personally because I wasn't looking at your technology. The second thing is just I think that energetically, and I don't know anything scientifically, but I mean energetically, you're talking about the video, like the screen, like it emits energy. Like it's literally emitting an energy field that I feel drawn into. And I do regular technology fasts. I like that you use that. I never thought of it like that, but like if I go camping or something for 3 days, like I won't bring my phone, or I won't turn it on or whatever. But when I come back from that, like once I come back to my home or whatever, like I feel the difference between like what feels to me like a natural vibration of being in nature versus coming back to like, let's just say my room and turning on even a light, like a light bulb, much less turning on a monitor or a TV screen. The vibrational frequency of these technologies,
Right.
to me, and this is just my own intuitive sense, feel like they vibrate at a higher frequency than the human being is supposed to function. So I think of like the whirring in a hard drive.
Yes.
I don't think a human being is meant or supposed to be operating at that speed.
Probably not. And this is the biophilia and
It's a
technophilia.
felt sense. Like I have a felt sense that I want to be sped up. It's like speed.
Yeah.
It's like I want to be sped
Yeah.
up by the energy from this computer.
You get a high.
Versus when I'm in nature and everything slows down and grounds.
Yeah.
It's like it's a felt sense.
Do you experience a withdrawal when you leave the technological society and go into the?
Oh yeah, at first it's like, what's gonna happen to me? Like, if something bad happens, like, what am I gonna do? Like, and I start experimenting. Like, I'll go to the grocery store and I won't bring my phone. Well, what if I get a flat tire? Immediately, I think of all these worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's ridiculous. What did people do before they had phones? They used payphones, or they asked a stranger
Yeah.
for help.
Yeah. Ask a stranger. That's my favorite example.
So-
is you stand in line for coffee and everybody's got their phones out,
Yeah.
instead of talking to each other. And this way, it's actually, you're highlighting a great point, which is that resource. The confidence of being alone. That's a piece that I left out of here for sake of time, but this way in which we need to be able to learn that skill of being alone, how to be in solitude, which is something we've lost. And so I experienced that as well. I have a lot of confidence being in the wild, but I forget it because I have this thing, and it takes me time to be able to get back and say, oh wait, I do have this. I do have this inner resource that's there, and I've anesthetized that thing because of the phone in my pocket.
Well, I think a phone is a transitional object. It's like a pacifier. I can be safe all the time. It's like a blankie.
Yeah.
I can be safe all the time because I have this.
Tell everybody you know.
No, I hear you.
So I have a confession to make.
It starts there.
Yesterday, I went home after work. I was really, really tired. I couldn't study. I said I'm going to eat dinner and watch one episode of Good Wife, and that started a binge. The funny thing is, this morning I woke up, and instead of like, it's also about how you hold it. So I woke up, and instead of like going into this automatic, like I'm going to kick myself for doing this, I was like, okay, fine. So this is shadow behavior. What's going on? I was journaling, and it came out that I've been holding, I haven't been giving myself the space to feel afraid, because there's a part of my life, like I feel like I'm on the verge of creating something like beautiful and powerful and amazing, and I've been pushing myself to go there without letting myself feel afraid, and there's a lot of like fear. So obviously there's this one part of me which has been feeling like, okay, I need to sabotage that. You need to stop, you need to stop, you need to slow down, you need to like hear me, you need to hear me. So it was really interesting going through that whole dynamic or between these two parts of me. And when you were talking about spiritual development or how technology addiction is about spiritual issues, I do want to point out it's a lot of the time it is about psychological issues as well. And this is what Jin was talking about. And I don't see psycho-spiritual issues as separate from each other. But anyway, it was really interesting to me this morning. And after I'd gone through that whole journaling thing, I was like, oh, and Jamison is talking about technology addiction today. So I'm going to make this confession today.
Sure, that's great. Thank you. It really is that the courage to be able to share that is part of what's on, because it is such a private or hidden thing.
Yeah.
What's out there. And it is the psycho-spiritual, very much so. Like the inventory process, as I work with people, is very much so a psychological one. And then the way in which we then go to spiritual. Especially I'm finding that people need to do a certain psychological amount of work to be able to get to the spiritual. And they aren't disconnected, but it's just the tools that I'm finding effective so far.
I'm Renee, we've met. So I work with weight, food issues, food addiction,
Yes.
and former food addict. And it's, as you were talking, I think that's in some ways very similar, because technology like food in our society, you can't live without. I mean, certainly
Right.
food, obviously, you can. And so when you look at the 12-step treatment model for alcohol, sure, alcohol, a complete abstinence is absolutely possible, right? And with harder drugs, it's desirable, right? I mean, you really, it's unhealthy.
Yes.
However, obviously with food and now with technology and gasoline, in our society at least, abstinence is not possible. So in order to work with food issues, I've had to develop another model, because I was in Overeaters Anonymous. I did the 12 steps for 3 years devotedly. I was addicted to meetings. I did the whole thing, right? Hi, and I'm Renee. I'm a compulsive overeater, and on and on. And that it got me to a certain place, but it didn't really allow me that place of, I guess what I would call recovery, or being a place of ease and peace around it. It couldn't take me there. So for myself, and then now this is the program that I have, that I deliver through technology.
Great. Yeah, it's a great view.
Yeah. So there's one-on-one, but a lot of it's through technology. And it's a psycho-spiritual program, and I like what you say about the spiritual component. And there's a quote from Jung that I put in my dissertation that says, Jung called it, I don't know if you come across this quote, but he called the urge for alcohol an urge for the union with God or the divine, which I thought was just
It is.
so
Very much so. And
so beautiful.
in a similar way.
So, so what I've done, not this is the only approach, but the way that I've taken it is that the moment of craving is actually a potential door or opening to transformation. So if you take that moment of craving, and I think you put your finger on certainly what I experienced with technology, which is the fear of missing out. To write my dissertation, I went to a library where I couldn't get on the internet. Right? That was my place, right? And I had to deal with that fear of, oh my God, what if someone needs to talk to me?
And in the confrontation.
Yeah.
Facing that.
Facing that, yeah. And so in facing that, and then having tools to address that and allow that to open you with a greater sense of being okay in the moment, a greater sense of just, it's all right.
A serenity.
A serenity, yeah. I think that's a really powerful place to move through your addiction, so the addiction itself can become this portal to spiritual growth.
Indeed, thank you. I think we're about out of time, and if I have just a minute for this, it is the 12-step traditions are but one of the ways that work with. The other, one of the 12-step traditions, Al-Anon, I'm actually finding incredibly useful here, how we live with each other. So how do we live with someone else who's an addict? I'm talking to more and more parents who are dealing with children that are doing this, right? And so how we show up and do that. How do I set boundaries around things saying, hey, when you use your phone while we're sitting at dinner, I feel, right? Where there's nonviolent communication or whatever showing up there. So it's also the social bit. And that is in the way in which, because we can't abstain, there are different modalities to be able to actually show up with each other and ourselves. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So